Welcome to the deep dive. We're here to really get into the nuts and bolts of ideas that last, taking apart complex sources to see what makes them tick. Today we're looking at something truly fundamental, something human and powerful, the great public address.
Yeah, and we're not just talking about, a speech that hits the mark for a specific moment in time. We mean the ones that stick around, the ones that become these sort of classic reference points for wisdom, for inspiration, sometimes even for a necessary jolt.
Exactly. So our mission, and it's a big one today, is to understand the underlying craft. What's the thread connecting, say, Cicero or Demosthenes? These giants of classical rhetoric. Cerdo figures like Russell Conwell talk about finding wealth in your own backyard, or powerful voices for justice like Sojourner Truth and Martin Luther King Jr. It's about finding that shared architecture.
And the sources we're drawing on, they really mirror that ambition. We've got Aristotle laying down the rules of persuasion, the real mechanics of it. Then you jump forward to someone like Conwell, almost like a sermon on opportunity. And we even bring in modern thinkers like Brené Brown on vulnerability or Stephen Covey on personal mission. It's quite a range.
It really is. It feels like we're diving into a kind of modern wisdom literature, especially with those speeches focused on advice, on guidance. Kurt Vonnegut had that great title, didn't he? If this isn't nice, what is advice for the young? It captures that spirit perfectly. The best advice, as we'll probably see, often has that sharp edge, that real honesty.
Absolutely. And to really grasp why these more modern speeches have such staying power, we really have to go back to the beginning. We need to look at the blueprint, the classical toolkit, if you will.
Okay, let's do it. Section 1, the classical craft, the rhetorical blueprint. Where do we start? Aristotle.
Got to start with Aristotle. He basically wrote the manual on persuasion, didn't he? And he was laser focused on elegance in language, but also how the very structure of what you say can shape belief. He argued pretty forcefully that the point of elegant wording wasn't just sounding nice. It was about helping the audience learn something quickly, that feeling of aha.
Okay, learn quickly. How does structure help with that?
Well, his big technique for this was antithesis and balance, basically putting opposing ideas, contraries, right next to each other, side by side.
And why is that pleasing? Why does that help us learn?
Because the contrast makes it immediately clear. You see A, you see not A right next to it, and your brain just grasps the difference instantly. It feels neat, logical, complete. And if you structure those opposing ideas in clauses that are roughly the same length or have a similar rhythm, that sense of balance gets reinforced. It creates this powerful feeling of order, almost like it has to be true because it sounds so balanced.
So the sound and the shape of the sentence actually reinforce the perceived truth of the ideas inside it. That connects to his point about elegance and learning then.
Exactly. If the structure lets you get it instantly, that's elegance. And this is why he thought metaphors were generally more powerful than similes.
Right, similes use like or as. They spell out the comparison for you.
Yeah, it's handed to you. But a metaphor, it just puts the two things together. All the world's a stage. And you, the listener, have to make the leap. You have to see the connection.
And that little spark, that moment of discovery you make yourself, that's the quick learning Aristotle was talking about. That's the satisfying part.
That's the idea. It's active, not passive. You feel clever for getting it, and that makes the idea stick. Now, here's where it gets really interesting, maybe even a little tricky, ethically speaking. Aristotle pointed out that if you structure your speech really tightly, using lots of these balanced antitheses, it looks like an enthymeme. A kind of logical argument, like a syllogism, but maybe with a premise missing.
Wait, hold on. So just by arranging the words in a neat, balanced way, you can make it seem like you've made a logical argument, even if you haven't actually laid out all the steps. That sounds like, like a rhetorical cheat code.
It kind of is. The source uses the phrase just by the design of its wording. The structure itself implies a conclusion. Think about those powerful parallel lists you hear sometimes. He fought for this, he stood for that, he achieved the other. The rhythm, the balance, it makes it sound like a completed argument, like the case is closed. Even if the underlying proof is a bit thin, your brain just accepts the pattern as proof.
Okay, so Aristotle gives us the intellectual framework, the bones of the argument. But then Cicero comes along and focuses more on the practical side, the delivery, the human element.
Very much so. Cicero was intensely practical. One of his big things was preparation. He insisted that a really great orator must separate the time for figuring out what to say from the time for actually speaking.
That seems obvious, but I guess it's easy to try and wing it.
Oh, totally. He saw people relying on their native genius, trying to figure it out as they went along, and he thought that was a recipe for disaster. You need dedicated time to plan, structure, and refine. Only then, when you stand up to speak, can you focus entirely on the delivery, on connecting with the audience.
And for Cicero, connecting meant mastering pathos, right? Playing on feelings.
Absolutely. He wasn't shy about it either. The source says pretty directly that you can lay down clever, even calculated rules for playing upon men's feelings and making prize of their goodwill. This isn't just about being likable, it's strategic. It's about understanding human emotion and using that understanding to guide the audience's judgment. It's about winning them over emotionally.
Calculated emotional manipulation. But then Cicero also brings in this very human element, stage fright. He points out that even the absolute masters felt real fear per temesserit. Why was that, if they were so skilled?
Well, it's the stakes, isn't it? It's the uncertainty. You can prepare perfectly, have all the skills, but you still don't know exactly how it's going to land. The audience's mood, some random interruption, maybe just have an off moment, things can go wrong. And for someone whose reputation rests on their ability to command a room, that possibility of public failure, that lack of complete control, is terrifying, even for the best.
That makes a lot of sense. And speaking of controlling the mood, Cicero also talks about humor, doesn't he?
He does. He thought a natural capacity for humor, quasi natura quadam, was essential for an orator. But here's the clever psychological bit. He observed that if the speaker is generally quite serious, maybe even severe, then the occasional moment of wit seems much funnier, much sharper. He used the word salsiora, saltier, more piquant.
Ah, so it's the contrast again. The unexpected break from the serious persona makes the joke land harder.
Exactly. It wakes the audience up, creates a little moment of surprise and connection. It's like adding spice to the main dish. Use it sparingly, but effectively.
Okay, Aristotle for structure, Cicero for preparation and emotion. Who rounds out this classical trio for us? Quintilian.
Quintilian brings it back squarely to the audience. His big focus was on adaptability and appeal. You have to tailor your message.
But not just based on demographics, right? He went deeper.
Much deeper. Yes, you consider the basic sex, rank, age, but he stressed that you have to look chiefly at their character. What kind of people are you actually talking to? What are their values, their biases, their likely reactions?
That sounds crucial, but also really difficult, especially if you're trying to persuade people who might be hostile to your message, like trying to move the unprincipled towards virtue. How did Quintilian suggest tackling that?
He was very pragmatic, almost cynical about it. His advice was, don't directly attack their lifestyle. Don't lecture them on morality. That just makes them defensive.
So what do?
You focus on the advantages of what you're proposing. Show them what's in it for them. Or, and this is often more powerful according to Quintilian, you focus on the appalling consequences of the alternative. Fear of bad outcomes, he thought, often motivates people, especially those not driven by high ideals, more effectively than the promise of good.
Make it about self-interest or self-preservation, not abstract virtue. And to make those consequences or advantages feel real, you need vividness.
Exactly. You need vivid narration, what the Greeks called enargia. Quintilian said the description should be so plausible, so detailed, that the audience feels like they're right there witnessing it.
Like that example he gives of Antonius, the corrupt official.
Oh, that's a masterclass in enargia. He doesn't just say Antonius was drunk and irresponsible. He paints this incredibly detailed picture. Antonius is passed out, snoring heavily, belching, utterly incapacitated by drink. His friends are desperately trying to wake him, splashing water on him, whispering urgently that the enemy is coming. You can almost smell the stale wine and feel the panic.
Yeah, you feel the disgrace, the danger. It's visceral. It hits you emotionally in a way that just stating he was derelict in his duty never could.
That's the power of making them feel like eyewitnesses. And one more technique from Quintilian we should mention is impersonation, or prosopopia.
This is where the speaker takes on the voice of someone else.
Right. You can speak as an opponent, revealing their supposed inner thoughts. You could theoretically bring gods down from heaven to speak, or even raise the dead to offer testimony. It adds drama, variety, and it allows the speaker to present different viewpoints or lend immense weight to certain arguments by putting them in the mouth of a compelling character.
Okay, so that's the classical toolkit. Balanced structure suggesting logic, careful preparation, strategic use of emotion and humor, deep audience analysis, Vivid description and dramatic impersonation. That's quite the foundation.
It's the vessel, right. The structure designed to hold and deliver a message powerfully.
But the vessel needs content. And a lot of enduring American speeches, particularly, seem filled with this urgent message about opportunity, about wealth, about pulling yourself up. Which brings us to section 2.
Yes, the rhetoric of opportunity and, crucially, immediate action.
And when you talk about that kind of rhetoric in America, you almost have to start with Russell Conwell and Acres of Diamonds, don't you?
You really do. It wasn't just a speech, it was like a cultural event. He supposedly delivered it over 6,000 times. And the core message was incredibly direct and very localized.
His central thesis. Forget looking elsewhere. The opportunity is right here. He'd be speaking in Philadelphia and tell the audience point blank that great wealth was within reach for almost every single person listening to him that night.
No need to go west, no need to seek some far-off fortune. It's here. And he hammered this home with that incredibly famous story.
The story of Ali Hafed and Golconda. Let's quickly recap that. It's so central.
Right. Ali Hafed is this Persian farmer, perfectly content until someone tells him about diamonds and how wealthy he could be. So he gets dissatisfied, sells his farm, leaves his family, and spends the rest of his life wandering the world searching for diamond mines.
And he finds nothing. Dies broke and miserable.
Exactly. Meanwhile, the guy who bought Ali Hafed's farm, one day he notices a funny-looking rock in the stream running through the garden. Turns out, it's a massive diamond. They investigate the stream bed in that same old garden Ali Hafed owned, and boom, they discover the Golconda diamond mines, some of the richest the world had ever seen. The diamonds were literally under Ali Hafed's feet the whole time.
Such a powerful, tragic parable about missing what's right in front of you. And Conwell used this to criticize people for failing to use local knowledge.
Precisely. He tells this anecdote about a guy who failed in business in Philadelphia. Why? Not lack of effort, according to Conwell, but because the guy didn't even know basic things about his own neighbors. Didn't know who they voted for, what church they went to, how many kids they had. Conwell's point was, how can you succeed if you don't understand the needs and wants of the people right around you? Success starts with local understanding.
Okay, but then comes the objection everyone raises. I can't start anything. I don't have any capital. How did Conwell handle that?
He hit that head on. He argued that knowing what people need, that local knowledge we just talked about, is actually more valuable than cash in the bank. He literally said it's more knowledge of a fortune than any amount of capital can give you.
So the real capital is the idea, the insight.
Yes. The ingenuity, the understanding of an unmet need right where you are. That's the starting point. Money might follow, but the idea comes first. And he had a great little story for this too.
The Hingham toy maker anecdote.
That's the one. This poor guy in Hingham, Massachusetts, unemployed, kind of down on his luck. His wife encourages him to just do something. So he takes out his penknife and idly whittles a little wooden chain from a piece of wet shingle.
Pretty simple thing.
Totally simple. But his kids immediately start squabbling over it. A neighbor sees this, suggests maybe he should make and sell toys. The guy is skeptical, thinks his kids are weird, their tastes won't match the market.
But he tries it anyway.
It does. But crucially, he asks his own children what kind of toys they'd like. A doll's bed, a little carriage, stuff like that. And he realizes he can figure out what people want by looking at his own family, his immediate circle. He said you can judge the human heart by oneself. So he starts making these simple toys based on what his kids wanted. It started with literally nothing but a penknife and some scrap wood. No capital.
And he became successful.
Immensely successful, according to Conwell. All because he tapped into that local need, using his own immediate experience as data. It's a perfect illustration of that idea, the gold mine between your ears, which people like Earl Nightingale would later champion.
Right. Nightingale's concept that your mind, your ability to think creatively and solve problems is your most valuable asset. It's the source of all wealth, all progress.
Exactly. Nightingale hammered this home. Everything we see around us, every convenience, every invention, started as an idea in someone's mind. That capacity for thought applied intelligently, especially to local needs like Conwell stressed, that's the real gold mine.
Okay, so you have the opportunity nearby and you have the mental tools.
Yeah.
But there's still a missing piece, isn't there? The internal drive, the mindset. This gets us to the price of success.
Yes. This is where Nightingale and others he drew on really focused. He pointed out this remarkable agreement across centuries of philosophers and thinkers, Marcus Aurelius, Emerson, William James. They all basically said the same thing. A man's life is what his thoughts make of it. Your thinking shapes your reality.
This sounds like positive thinking, but they presented it as more fundamental, like a law. Almost like a universal law, yeah.
Yeah.
Think negatively, focus on limitations, and you'll likely get negative results. Think positively, focus on possibilities, believe you can succeed, and you dramatically increase your chances. William James put it starkly. If you genuinely want to be rich or learned or good, you have to want that one thing intensely, almost exclusively. You can't dilute your focus by wanting 100 other things just as much. Focus is key. Believe and succeed.
So how do you do that? How do you operationalize belief? Nightingale had a practical method, didn't he? The 30-day test.
He did. It was about taking this principle and turning it into concrete action, a set of practical steps for the learner.
What did it involve?
5 main things, really. First, set one single, clear, definite goal. Not 5, not 10. 1. Write it down.
Okay, one goal. Then what? Second, let your mind really explore it. Speculate freely on all the ways you might achieve it. Don't censor yourself initially. Third, consciously refuse to believe that circumstances can defeat you. Act as if failure isn't an option.
So mindset management.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Fourth, when a course of action becomes clear, act on it promptly. Don't procrastinate.
Yeah.
And fifth, a very practical piece. Save at least 10% of everything you earn. Discipline in finance mirrors discipline in thought.
And the core practice was carrying that written goal and looking at it constantly.
Several times a day, keep it top of mind. Force your focus onto that single objective. That was the essence of the couple-day test.
So the rhetoric of opportunity combines this outward focus on local needs, Conwell, with this intense inward focus on mindset and discipline, Nightingale. It's a powerful combination.
Very powerful. But even that isn't the whole picture for an address that truly endures, is it? You need more than just structure and a plan for success.
You need depth. You need character, which takes us perfectly into Section 3, the call to character, integrity, and meaning.
Right. If Section 2 was about the how-to of achievement, this section is about the who. Who do you need to be to achieve things meaningfully and ethically? And the foundation here really starts with finding meaning.
And for that, Viktor Frankl's work, logotherapy, seems central. His argument wasn't about chasing happiness or power.
No, quite the opposite. Frankl argued that the fundamental human drive, the greatest task, is to find meaning in life. And that meaning often comes not from pleasure, but from facing challenges, from purpose. The goal needs to be big enough, demanding enough to really consume your energies.
And Stephen Covey connected that abstract idea of meaning to something very concrete, didn't he? The idea of a personal constitution.
He did. Covey said, okay, once you have a sense of your purpose, your core values, you need to write it down. Create a personal mission statement. This document becomes your anchor, the source of your proactivity. It's based on principles, not just fleeting moods or circumstances.
And this constitution helps you define what's truly at the center of your life. Covey talked about 4 key factors that need to be in balance.
Yeah, 4 interdependent elements: security, guidance, wisdom, and power.
Let's quickly define those. Security is.
Security is your basic sense of self-worth, your identity, your emotional anchor. Guidance is your internal compass, the source of direction in your life, your principles.
Okay. And wisdom.
Wisdom is your perspective, your judgment, your sense of balance, seeing the big picture, understanding how different parts relate to the whole.
And finally, power.
Power is simply the capacity to act, the strength, the courage, the ability to make choices, overcome habits, and actually do things in line with your guidance and wisdom.
And when these 4 guys, security, guidance, wisdom, power, are aligned and based on solid principles, that's when you get, what, a strong character.
Covey called it the great force of a noble personality. And this is crucial. Achieving that kind of internal alignment and strength often requires facing uncomfortable truths about ourselves, which leads us directly to Brené Brown's work on shame and vulnerability.
This feels like a really important connection. How does shame fit into building character for, say, effective communication or leadership?
Well, Brown defines shame brilliantly as this universal fear of disconnection. It's that deep, gut-wrenching feeling that something about us, something we've done or failed to do, or just art, makes us unworthy of love, belonging, and connection.
And the source material mentions something pretty stark about it, that experiencing shame is basically part of being human.
Yeah, it makes the point that the only people who don't experience shame are those who lack the capacity for empathy and connection. In other words, sociopaths. So for the rest of us, shame is unavoidable. It's part of the human condition.
Yet we spend so much energy trying to avoid feeling it or showing it. How does this relate to authenticity in speaking or leading?
Because authenticity requires vulnerability. And vulnerability means being willing to show up even when you can't control the outcome, which often involves risking shame or criticism. Think about Covey's habit 5. Seek first to understand, then to be understood.
Okay, trying to understand someone else first.
Yeah.
How is that vulnerable?
Because truly listening, truly trying to see the world from someone else's perspective means you have to be open to being changed by what you hear. You have to lower your defenses. It requires that inner security Covey talked about, to be open enough to potentially be wrong or to have your views challenged.
Ah, I see. Empathic listening is risky because it makes you vulnerable to influence yourself.
Exactly. You can't genuinely connect or influence others from behind a wall of certainty. True connection, the kind that makes an address resonate deeply, requires the speaker to be grounded internally but open externally. It's a paradox.
So modern psychology emphasizes embracing this emotional reality, this vulnerability. But ancient philosophy, like the Stoics, took a different approach to emotion, didn't they? More about control or even elimination. Let's look at Seneca.
Yeah, Seneca offers a fascinating and frankly challenging counterpoint. He puts forward this idea of the impossibility of moderation in vice.
Meaning what, exactly? You can't just be a little bit greedy or a little bit cowardly.
That's basically it. Seneca argued that virtue, things like courage, justice, wisdom, inherently contains its own measure, its own moderation. But the evils, which for Stoics are the disruptive passions like intense fear, crippling desire, overwhelming sadness, these things don't have a moderate setting. He saw them like diseases or like downhill slides. Once they gain momentum, they're incredibly hard to stop. He argued it's actually easier to root them out entirely than to try and keep them under control once they've taken hold.
Wow. So forget managing negative emotions. The Stoic ideal is to eliminate them. That's a tall order for someone giving a speech.
It's a lifelong pursuit. It points towards an ideal of virtue as self-sufficiency. The truly wise person, in Seneca's view, doesn't need external things, even friends, for their happiness or function.
But they still value friendship.
Oh, absolutely. But Seneca says the wise person desires friends not out of need or utility, not because they need help if they get sick or poor, but as an opportunity to practice friendship, to exercise virtues like loyalty, kindness, and generosity. So their noble qualities don't just lie dormant.
So friendships are arenas for practicing virtue, not safety nets. They aren't fair-weather relationships based on mutual benefit alone.
Exactly. They're grounded in shared principles. And how does the Stoic achieve the peace of mind needed for this? Seneca says it comes from having a fixed and unchanging standard of judgment.
How do you get that?
Through learning, through understanding the laws of life as a whole, what he called doctrines, once you understand the true nature of things, what's really valuable versus what's merely preferred but ultimately indifferent, like wealth, health, reputation, then you can judge situations consistently and remain undisturbed by external ups and downs.
Okay, so whether it's finding meaning like Frankl, building a principled constitution like Covey, embracing vulnerability like Brown, or achieving detachment like Seneca, the common thread is this deep internal work. It's about building a solid core of character.
Precisely. And you absolutely need that solid core, that integrity, because very often the addresses that echo through history aren't the ones offering easy comfort. They're the ones that courageously confront uncomfortable truths, especially about social injustice.
Which perfectly sets up our final section, the rhetoric of confrontation and social justice.
Yeah, this is where we see the tools of rhetoric, that classical structure and emotional appeal, really sharpened and aimed at challenging the status quo. And a prime example has to be Frederick Douglass and his speech, "What to the slave is the 4th of July."
An incredibly powerful piece. What was his key rhetorical strategy there? He famously refused to argue certain points.
Exactly. He made a deliberate pivot from argument to denunciation. He declared he wouldn't waste time arguing something that was self-evident, specifically whether the enslaved person is a man.
How did he justify not needing to argue it?
By pointing directly at the laws created by the slaveholders themselves. He cited Virginia law, 72 crimes that carried the death penalty for a black man compared to only 2 for a white man. His point was devastatingly simple. You don't make laws with dozens of capital offenses for animals.
You only legislate for beings capable of understanding and responsibility for humans.
Precisely. He also pointed to laws forbidding teaching slaves to read or write. Again, why forbid teaching an animal? The very existence of these laws, Douglass argued, was an admission, a concession of the slave's manhood. The point was already proven by his opponent's own actions.
So having established that, where did he go? He moved to direct accusation.
Oh, absolutely. The speech builds to this incredible crescendo of moral outrage, denouncing America's shameless hypocrisy. He declared that for sheer barbarity and hypocrisy, America reigns without a rival. And he didn't leave it general. He specifically contrasted the public condemnation of the foreign slave trade, which was labeled piracy, with the acceptance and even honorability of the internal slave trade, the horrific domestic market tearing families apart for profit. That glaring contradiction was the core of his indictment.
The power of pointing out hypocrisy. Now, compare that structured, legally sharp rhetoric with someone like Sojourner Truth. Her power seems to have come from a different place.
Very different, yes. With Sojourner Truth, so much of it was about the power of her presence and her unwavering focus. The accounts of her at the Fourth National Women's Rights Convention in New York in 1853 are amazing. Here she was, embodying, as the source says, the two most hated elements of humanity at the time, being black and being a woman. And her very presence on that platform, calm and dignified in the face of a hostile, jeering crowd, reportedly quelled the mob.
Just by being there, embodying the struggle.
It seems so. She commanded attention not through complex arguments, but through her sheer being, her lived experience. And her goals, her message, were incredibly clear and focused.
She wanted universal suffrage.
Yes, and she had this plan to rouse the people on equality. Her rhetoric was often simple, direct, and used really compelling, down-to-earth imagery, like her saying she wanted to sojourn once to the ballot box before I die, just to see if a woman's vote looked any different when dropped into that beautiful glass globe. It's such a simple, human, visual image, it cuts right through the political noise.
That focus on a simple, powerful image or phrase. We see that used later, too, like with Martin Luther King Jr. and his use of repetition.
Absolutely. King was a master of classical techniques, particularly anaphora, the repetition of a word or phrase at the beginning of successive clauses. Think about the I Have a Dream speech.
The 100 years later section.
Exactly that. 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty.
That repetition is like a hammer blow. It makes the point impossible to ignore.
It does more than just emphasize. That rhythmic insistence gives the statement the feeling of an undeniable, relentless truth. It echoes that Aristotelian idea that structure creates the feeling of proof, but here King uses it to highlight the persistence of injustice, the failure to live up to a promise. It's incredibly powerful.
And delivering these kinds of confrontational messages, whether it's Douglas's denunciation or King's relentless rhythm, clearly requires immense courage. It leans back to that idea of character, doesn't it? The courage to be unpopular.
It absolutely does. You have to be willing to stand apart from the crowd, maybe even from your own supporters sometimes, to speak a difficult truth.
The source material even connects this to judicial philosophy, referencing Justice Ginsburg citing Chief Justice Rehnquist.
Right, the idea that a good judge's fundamental obligation is to do what is legally right, even, and perhaps especially, when it's unpopular, when it's not what the home crowd wants to hear. That same principle applies to the orator aiming for enduring impact. Whether you're Russell Conwell telling comfortable Philadelphians they're overlooking opportunities right under their noses, or Frederick Douglass confronting national hypocrisy head-on, that willingness to stand on principle, regardless of immediate popularity, is often what makes the message last.
What a journey indeed. From Aristotle's rules for balance and elegance, through the American dream rhetoric of Conwell, the deep character work of Covey and Seneca, and finally to the courageous confrontations of Douglas, Truth, and King. It's quite a synthesis. #outro.
It really is. When you pull it all together, it seems like an enduring address needs this blend, this harmony of different elements. First, you need the craft, the technical artistry that comes right down from classical rhetoric, the balance, the use of analogy, the vivid descriptions, the smart handling of emotion.
Right, the structural vessel. Then you need the substantive message, often touching on these core themes of opportunity, purpose, and proactive character. Think Conwell's diamonds, Nightingale's focus.
Yeah.
Covey's mission, that call to take responsibility for your own life and actions.
And finally, layered on top of that, or maybe underpinning it all, is the courage to speak difficult truths. The willingness to confront injustice like Douglas, to embody the struggle like Truth, or even to embrace necessary vulnerability, as Brené Brown talks about. That takes real guts.
So it really boils down to those pillars of persuasion we learn about. Ethos, pathos, and logos. Credibility, emotion, logic. But I feel like the takeaway here is that ethos, your character, your credibility, who you are, comes first.
I think that's right. Covey put it so well when he said, the most important ingredient we put into any relationship is not what we say or what we do, but what we are. That internal integrity, that foundation of character, that's what gives the words weight. Without it, even the most brilliant rhetoric can feel hollow, like mere manipulation.
Which leads us to a really interesting, maybe even challenging final thought. It comes from Plato, actually.
Hmm.
Plato, through his character Socrates, was famously skeptical of set speeches and even of writing itself.
Yeah, Socrates worried that written words and memorized speeches were dead. They couldn't answer back, they couldn't clarify themselves, they couldn't engage in the dynamic back and forth of real dialogue, which he saw as the only true path to understanding.
So if these masterful speeches we've been discussing are, in a Platonic sense, technically dead speeches,
Mm.
and if part of their power comes from their artistry, their structure, their emotional pull, which might require us as listeners to maybe switch off our critical thinking just a little bit to be swept away, then what's our responsibility as the audience when we listen to these enduring addresses today?
That's the provocative question, isn't it? When we're moved by the eloquence of a Douglas or a King, or inspired by the practicality of a Conwell, are we truly engaging with the wisdom contained within? Or are we sometimes just, appreciating the performance, succumbing to the rhetorical skill? Perhaps the real challenge for us, as listeners seeking to learn from these masters, is to do both. To allow ourselves to be moved and inspired by the artistry, but then to step back, engage critically, question, and integrate the ideas actively into our own thinking. To turn that powerful performance into lasting personal knowledge.
A lot to think about there. How do we consume wisdom without just being consumed by the delivery? Something to ponder. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Until next time.